Did you know that Sky offers businesses broadband to small and medium businesses in the UK? Whether you're a coffee shop, a consultancy, a pub, or a plumber, a newly launched startup, or a well-established business with tens of employees, always-on internet is vital to keep your business running. That's why Sky Business keeps you always connected with 4G backup and a stay connected guarantee that gives you one-off credit back if your 4G backup doesn't activate in 30 seconds. So you're never offline, not even for a minute. And switching has never been easier, with dedicated account managers who are with you every step of the way. This is business broadband that works as hard as you do. Visit skybusiness.com for more T's and C's and details on available packages.
Hello all, I'm Neil Patterson, this is the Sky News Daily, and today we are putting Interpol under investigation. The International Criminal Police Organisation, to give it its full title, has been in existence for almost 100 years now. Police forces from around the world sharing information, all to hunt down criminals for whom international borders mean precious little. A new series of podcasts from Sky News is taking a close look at Interpol's Red Notice system, and that's the means by which forces can request their foreign counterparts detain and arrest criminals on their behalf. But our investigation reveals these notices are often abused, detaining people who aren't in fact criminals at all. Joining us here on The Daily, Sahar Zand, the podcast presenter, and Heidi Pett, its producer. Lovely to have you both here in the Daily studio. And Sahar, I suppose I should come to you first. Fascinating topic, lots of detail for us to get into in just a second. But how did you arrive upon this as a subject in the first place?
Prior to coming up with this, every time I heard Interpol, Red Notice, I thought Hollywood, men in guns with their glasses chasing down some of the most dangerous criminals in the world, as I suppose most people do. And the more I dug into this, the more I realised the huge scale of the problem and the range of people it's affecting. And the scary bit was that most people don't know they're under notice until they end up arrested. You could end up on it over a business dispute. You could end up on it over a bank debt. You could end up on it over your journalism, on your political activism. And it's not just one or two people.
Explain exactly what Interpol is, because I suspect that there'll be plenty of people listening to this who imagine it is some kind of, cross between the Thunderbirds and International Rescue, that there's some international police force operating with impunity with the world as its jurisdiction. I mean, which is absolutely not the case.
Every person we spoke to, whether that was a lawyer, an expert, ex-officials from inside Interpol itself, at some point, everyone gave us this spiel about what Interpol is not, which is, they don't have police officers with guns on the street. They're not the ones that actually go and do the arrests. So Interpol is an organisation which has as its members police forces all around the world. And so Interpol itself doesn't make decisions about who they go after. What happens is the police in a certain country will say, this person has been accused of a serious crime. We have reason to believe they've left the country or that they're going to. And they upload something onto this big database, which police forces around the rest of the world also have access to. And so the way that people explain it is that it's not an international police force, it's an international police notice board.
Explain then the concept of the Red Notice.
They have a lot of different notices, basically. So a red notice is the most serious one, and that is to say, there is somebody out there who we would like you to apprehend on our behalf. They have other notices for things like missing people, children who have gone missing. They have a database of lost and stolen passports. So it's sharing all sorts of relevant information for police forces. But the red notice is the most serious one, and that's the one that would get you arrested or extradited or deported.
Yeah. It's basically like an international digital poster for a wanted person. Mm-hmm. And like Heidi alluded to, they basically rely on trusting the countries who are issuing these notices to be truthful.
It does strike me that the problem with having this international notice board is just as you both have outlined. Anyone can put something up on that notice board, and there is no checking, no looking at the veracity of the detail.
There is some checking, so there didn't used to be. So essentially what happened is that in the aftermath of 9/11, all different parts of the world were bringing their systems online. And there was this confluence of events where 9/11 happened. There was an American in charge of Interpol, and he said, we need to modernise the system, and this notice board needs to be online. And that allowed them to disseminate them much faster. People could check them faster. And he was warned that that would increase the possibility that the system could be abused, because the faster that information gets around the world, the less safeguards there are. And so for a long time, there were no safeguards. But in 2014, there was a new Secretary General of Interpol, that's Jürgen Stock, who we speak to in the podcast. And he actually brought in a bunch of changes, including a body that is supposed to check all of the notices before they are uploaded to the system and before they go to the member countries. But that task force is incredibly understaffed. There's like 20,000 red notices each year, and there's 30 to 40 people on the task force. So it's just not practical.
I can understand the logic in having this international organisation facilitating cooperation between police forces for various types of crime. People smuggling, for example, drug trafficking. But as your investigation has discovered, it's not always being used to target people like that. Tell me about some of those that you've been speaking to. Actually, a name that immediately leaps off the page to me, Bill Browder.
Bill is an American-born British businessman turned into a political activist. He was once one of the biggest investors, foreign investors in Russia. And whilst he was there, he made a lot of money, but he also made a lot of enemies. He discovered that, as he says, a lot of the oligarchs were basically using the state-owned companies as money-making machines. He started making a lot of noise about it. And that's when Russia essentially raided his office and expelled him in 2005. But then he hired a lawyer in Russia called Sergei Magnitsky to help him investigate and to expose the corruption.
We've learnt of late it's not wise to wind up Vladimir Putin, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately. And he went up right against him and his friends. So that led to a lot of death threats and a lot of threats towards Bill. He wasn't in Russia. But his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was arrested. He spent over a year in prison where he was tortured, and he eventually died in prison. And since then, Bill made it his life mission to get justice for Sergei. And he started lobbying around the world. That's when he became a political activist. Mm-hmm. And his lobbying actually ended up creating a law, the US passing a law called the Magnitsky Act, which is essentially cracking down harder on government officials known or identified as for gross violation of human rights. Mm-hmm. And 6 months after this law was passed, which was later followed by some other countries, including the UK, Bill Browder had the first notice sent for him.
Interpol's position is that there has never been an active red notice on Bill Browder, that they have refused or deleted all of them before they even went to member countries. Let's hear some of that interview that you conducted with Bill himself.
I was able to write to Interpol and tell them that this was an abuse of their system, that this was politically motivated. They deleted the red notice. And then a month later, the Russians reapplied. They deleted that one. Then all of a sudden, the Russian general prosecutor was inviting the head of Interpol to Russia to discuss my case. They applied again and again and again and again. I fly to Madrid in May 2018. The next morning, I opened the hotel room door, and in mid-knock is the manager of the hotel. Standing behind him were 2 uniformed Spanish police officers. And the manager said in a sort of embarrassed way, "These men need to see your identification." So I pulled out my passport. They compared it to a clipboard they had, and then one of the officers said, "You're under arrest." And I said, "What for?" And he said, "Interpol, Russia." And there's this total buzz in the police station. It's not every day that they catch an international fugitive wanted by Interpol. So they put me into the holding cell, and then I could feel the mood in the police station suddenly deflate. The chief of police with the translator come, and they say, "Mr. Browder, we've been on the phone with Interpol. They've just informed us that the arrest warrant is no longer valid. You're free to go."
What is the process then? There is a process by which a red notice can be rescinded.
There is a body that is supposed to be monitoring these red notices and to make sure that they're legitimate before they go through. But we know that sometimes some of the cases get through the net, and we don't know how many. Then there is another body called CCF, and that body is responsible for red notices that were issued but wrongfully. What happens if you've been subjected to a wrongful red notice or any notice of that kind? You get a lawyer. Your lawyer sends a letter outlining why it was wrongful, your notice was wrongful, and they provide evidence. And then CCF reviews it. And if they also think that it was wrongful, then they delete it. And that takes money, that takes time, that takes a lot of resources that many people don't have.
Heidi, this is all rather redolent of that old Latin phrase, which I will not try to pronounce because my Latin training was an awful long time ago, but who will guard the guards? Who is sitting on top of Interpol, making sure that Interpol are doing the right thing?
The short answer is nobody. So Interpol has immunity in basically every jurisdiction. You can't sue Interpol.
Which presumably is a condition of your domestic police force's entry into Interpol.
Yeah, it's an international organisation, and so it has a lot of the same features and a lot of the same problems that you would see with something like the UN, with the Security Council. Every country is a member, and it relies on cooperation. So they don't really want to kick any countries out because that would make them a haven for criminals. And they also don't want countries to stop cooperating with red notices. And so even if you go through this process and you have petitioned the CCF, which is the Commission for Control of Interpol's Files, they make it sound like it's a sort of data protection body as opposed to the body that decides whether or not you're going to be deported and extradited. But if you go through this process and they then turn around and say, yes, we're very sorry, it is obvious that this red notice that was brought for you by Russia or by China or by Bahrain, it's very obvious that that was politically motivated and it's because you're a dissident. That's kind of the end of the process. There's no one that you can go to for compensation. There's no one that you can go to redress the wrongs. You don't get the money that you spent back. You don't get the time that you spent in prison back. Or if you've already been deported and extradited, Interpol doesn't take any action to take any redress about that. And so one of the cases that we feature in the podcast is a man who he was arrested in Morocco on an Interpol red notice from China, and he has been in prison in Morocco for 2 years, and he still is at risk of extradition to China, even though Interpol has gone through the whole process and said, look, that red notice should never have been issued. That's the end of the line for them. They don't take any further responsibility for what happens to you afterwards.
OK, so let's hear from Zainur Hassan, wife of the Uyghur activist Idris Hassan.
Because of Interpol's red notice, my husband was arrested, and because Chinese government abused the Interpol, and they cancelled the red notice after my husband arrested.
Is that your husband?
David, my husband.
Oh.
Assalamu alaikum.
If Moroccan government sent me to China, this equal to death. Maybe I am forever in the prison. I cannot see my children, my family, forever maybe.
The Moroccan government says Idris Hassan's extradition has been suspended, whilst appeals by his legal team are ongoing. They have confirmed that the red notice which led to his arrest has now been cancelled.
A lot of things have to come together for you to be able to hear about these victims. A lot of the people we don't. And one thing I should really point out is that Interpol has a constitution, and within its constitution, it says that any notice, any red notice issued, it can't be politically motivated, it can't be ethnically motivated, religiously, and they have a set of rules, and that's what we mean when we say wrongful or illegitimate notices.
Now time to thank our partner of this episode, Employment Hero, an all-in-one service for HR, payroll and recruitment. It's HR software by humans, making performance reviews a breeze and managing all your people, contracts and policies. It's payroll software, just faster, saving your time and paying your people with automated payroll. It's access to great talent. Invest in your team and reap the benefits long term. It's the best decision you'll ever make. Visit employmenthero.com/UK. Thanks again to Employment Hero for supporting this podcast.
You've mentioned already that there have been steps taken to reform this organisation, this institution, But, again, at first glance, frankly, it doesn't sound like anything has gone far enough.
It's a tricky balance as far as they're concerned, because they need to weigh up having a system that is speedy. If you have very serious crimes being committed and people fleeing the country, whether that is murder, terrorism, money laundering, that kind of thing, they're trying to balance a system which is workable enough that you can actually catch those people.
Yeah, you need those notices to go out within minutes, if not hours. Yeah.
Exactly. And so they're trying to balance that with protecting people from those countries or those police forces that are abusing the system. They think that they're getting it mostly right. Mm-hmm. When we spoke to Jürgen Stock, he said, the percentage of notices that we need to take another look at is about 5% of the 20,000. And then it's a smaller proportion of that actually get cancelled. And so while they say that one wrongful case is too many, I would characterise them as being fairly comfortable that they have fixed the problems in the best way that they can.
And I actually asked him, I was like, do you think you fixed the problem? Because Jürgen Stock is coming towards the end of his term, and fixing these wrongful red notices is essentially his legacy. So he's very...
In the 100th year,
in the 100th
as well,
year.
of Interpol itself.
Exactly. So he's very defensive. And when I interviewed him, he basically had a set of different things that he wanted to say to basically defend that legacy.
Let's just have a quick listen then to the Interpol Secretary General, Jürgen Stock.
The purpose was to make sure that, again, every piece of information is properly checked against our rules. And I made that a priority within my term in office as Secretary General from the very beginning until today, to protect the integrity of the system, the integrity of the information, and also ensure that there is trust in Interpol. We are concluding that it's sufficiently staffed because most of the responses are being done, if a member country is requesting a notice, within 24 or 48 hours. Because sometimes, if a murderer is on the run, time matters.
Given all those known unknowns, and the lack of transparency that there is about pretty much everything to do with Interpol, what's to be done? Is there a solution to this?
There are. Yeah,
on a podcast.
I was going to say, as part of researching and producing this, we've spoken to a lot of people who have made this basically their life's work. There's sort of two tracks there. There are people who say, we need to burn the whole thing to the ground and start again. And you need an international police organisation that only has as its member countries those countries where there is rule of law. And then there are people who say, it can be reformed. And the way to reform it is in beefing up the consequences for the countries that are abusing the system. So there is actually a mechanism within Interpol's constitution where they can expel countries that are known to abuse the system.
How many have they expelled so far in their history?
The only countries that have been suspended was Syria for some time during the Civil War, but that took about a year and a half actually into the Civil War until Syria was suspended. And we know that Turkey's access to the database has been restricted because after the attempted coup in 2016, they tried to upload thousands of names. And Interpol did actually take action in that case. And we know that from speaking to people who worked inside the organisation at the time. But Interpol won't admit publicly that they even did that because they are so afraid of annoying or sort of scaring away their member countries that they won't even publicly talk about the remedies that they are using.
The podcast series is called Dirty Work, the misuse of Interpol red notices, and as we always say, it is available now wherever you get your podcasts. Sahar, Heidi, lovely to chat to you. Fascinating work. Best of luck with it. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's your lot from The Daily for today. I will be back tomorrow. We'll see you then.
The moment you hold your grandson for the first time. The moment you say goodbye to a loved one for the last time. The moment it's time to hand over the family business to your daughter. Irwin Mitchell's legal and financial experts understand the complexities of life. We offer a tailored service to help you plan for the future and protect your legacy so you can enjoy the moments that matter. Authorised and regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority.